So let's turn now to research questions. And to anticipate, we're going to talk more about thesis statements, but a thesis statement is an answer to a research question. Okay, so we're formulating research questions, and then we'll move into the writing stage. And in particular, we're talking about, Guttull and the three-story thesis statement. But a thesis statement is an answer to a research question. So that's just to anticipate this. Now, let's go back to actual research questions. And again, we have to be in the context of undergraduate research here. So the scope of the questions that you're going to ask, you have to, again, be realistic. And as I said earlier, typically the type of essay or type of writing assignment that you're getting as an undergraduate, we want you to be engaging with the corpus of research and works in that field, and sort of engaging with and thinking critically about the methods. So that's why synthesis becomes a sort of default approach in terms of undergraduate research in many cases, because it's actually what's realistic. So you have to formulate research questions that are narrow and focused and have sources and accomplish the what your instructors are looking at, which is your ability to demonstrate that you're entering into scholarship as conversation and other key methods. So let's talk about a few examples of research questions and narrowing and focusing research questions. Now the framework lists under one of the dispositions, I think it is, that research questions can be simple but disruptive. So that's important to understand. We'll give a few examples of simple but disruptive questions. Okay, let's go. Woman question. Sojourner Truth was a very famous abolitionist. She was a slave in the United States that was emancipated. And she gave a very famous speech in 1851 where she asked, "Ain't I a woman?" Simple question, extremely disruptive in the context of the United States in 1851, coming from a black woman who was an emancipated slave. And it was disruptive because in the United States at that time, whites in particular talked about black women different from white women, okay? And slaves, female slaves, different from white women. So, "Ain't I a woman" is really powerful in terms of identity, right? So, Sojourner Truth, I'm a woman, just as, any other white woman is a woman, right? Ain't I a woman? Disruptive, force people to think about, the identity of black women, reflect on and compare to the identity of how society viewed black women compared to white women. Very simple, but very disruptive, okay? And Lenin, V.I. Lenin, 1913, who benefits? So the Russian revolutionary V.I. Lenin in 1913 posed the question, who benefits? Now this has, goes back this question all the way back into the Roman Empire, but very simple question, and again, very disruptive, right? If people start to ask that question, right, who benefits? And you could think of, historically other questions that were simple, but extremely disruptive. I don't know. Well, I don't know how disruptive it was, but the Smiths, how soon is now? 1984. So, questions. The point about this is questions don't have to be extremely convoluted and complex to lead to extremely interesting, powerful research. Okay, so the trick with undergraduate research is that the ability to develop research questions presupposes on your part familiarity with the topic, and that familiarity with the topic is going to vary. And that is why we see the level or the prescriptive titles of essays sort of given earlier in first year, and the sort of a lack of independence and autonomy given to students in terms of formulating research questions. And this is because the lecturers are assuming that you're not able to generate research questions because you lack the familiarity to recognize the gaps and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, we want you to get in the habit of being able to actually formulate the research questions. And this is really important in terms of building autonomous, independent students, right? So rather than actually give you the essay title and send you on your way, there's actually a huge amount of intellectual growth and benefit to be had from developing research questions. So, what we would tend to do in critical skills would be a little bit more open-ended and maybe have a kind of a more general topic, but we do really want to see students start to go through the process of developing a research question. And, the stages of searching, keyword searching, reading, revising, revisiting, rereading. This is this crucial term that we've run into before. Iterative, right? That this research is this iterative process. So you shouldn't underestimate your own ability to come up with actual valid research questions, in particular, as I said, when you are kind of thinking in terms of synthesis. So, if you're engaging with readings and topics or readings about topics which are, 5-10 years old, the research is constantly moving on. And the other thing, of course, that's crucial about this is, things may function in one geography or one context and have not been addressed in another. It's a very classic method for a lot of people is to find some empirical research that was done in a different time or place and then ask, how does that compare to this time and place? Okay, so I'm often telling students, as a Yank in Ireland, I'm very familiar with the context of what happens in the United States isn't necessarily, going to work in Ireland and vice versa, right? But it's a fascinating research questions about, why certain things work in one country and don't work in another country, or we're moving on to sort of like a health type scare with the latest virus. How has media portrayed this compared to how is portrayed SARS or other things like that? So I actually think that even first-year students, you can start to work on research questions and formulate research questions. And the sort of, spoon feeding the actual essay title, takes a lot of the intellectual growth out of it. I mean, we want you to try to go through the process of finding sources, narrowing a topic, revising a topic, and coming up with other type of research questions. This is this iterative process. Okay. So let's talk about persistence and flexibility. So listen to your sources. Okay. So if you read an article and I don't know, let's say we'll go back to my example that I'm talking about, Wikipedia and how people read Wikipedia or whatever. And then I start to, I'm reading articles about Wikipedia and I keep finding, a reference every once in a while to how there are certain governments now who are starting to manipulate content on Wikipedia or influence content on Wikipedia. And I say, well, yeah, that's fine. But I'm kind of looking at something else. And then I find another source that talks about it and another source. So eventually I better kind of have the flexibility to say, well, actually, if I'm running into this topic, maybe it should actually be part of my research, right? Maybe I should revisit my research question if I keep running into this. Okay. So listen to your sources. And again, as you go through your searches, Google Scholar, the library catalog, if you're searching for one thing and your search results are bringing up, consistently, some results relating to, a specific topic, you might say, well, that's kind of interesting. I'll, have the flexibility to adapt to that. Be a detective, right? So again, in terms of the approach, research, think of it as a type. You are being an investigator, you need to be creative, you need to kind of try to think about things from different angles. You need to be creative in how you find sources, right? And persistent. So there was some interesting research done a couple of years ago. Basically, somebody shadowed students. They had the permission who were in the library and watched as students did library searches. And you probably won't be surprised that most students only use the first screen of results. They actually don't scroll down. And so just in terms of persistence, if your first screen doesn't give you what you want, you may say, well, I might have to revise my topic or something like that. And again, I would kind of urge a little bit of persistence there in terms of multiple searches, changing keywords, scrolling down, having a closer look, and not giving up until you kind of are sure that you've done a decent search and the material isn't there, or and the other thing, just in terms of persistence and flexibility, a lot of times when students aren't finding material, it's not that the material isn't there, it's that the question they're asking is not giving the results. So, if you can't find sources, it's not that the sources are not necessarily the problem, it's probably the question you're asking is the issue here. So again, in terms of persistence and flexibility, have that ability to kind of think about multiple topics, multiple research questions, and as you look through sources and read sources, adapt or change your topic to fit that. Okay, and it is detective work, right? You are looking for clues, you are finding clues, and you are developing, a method as a detective, whatever your field is, to go through a research process. And then just in terms of the intellectual humility, if you find a source, and you say, I've got something here, this person is completely wrong, or whatever, you need a little bit of intellectual humility there, because remember, if you're dealing with peer-reviewed sources that you're finding from an academic database, right? All of these sources are in conversation. So it's not that we want you to win an argument, right? We want you to join a conversation. Okay, so that's where the sort of the intellectual humility comes in. And if we think of the sum total of knowledge of a field as some sort of circle, you're joining in the conversation and you're just adding a tiny bit more to that field. And so yeah, a little bit of intellectual humility is good, but again, not to the extent that it kind of undermines your confidence, but just in terms of, as an undergraduate, your job is not, to go in there and kind of make determinations. Oh my, we can do away with this school of history or whatever. We want you to enter the conversation, okay? And I've mentioned this before. They say, I say, and we'll get to that, right? So the last thing to say is, don't be afraid to ask for help. So particularly as it relates to narrowing down your topic. Now, the Maynooth University Library actually has a very good list online session on research topics, but either your lecturer or the library can help in narrowing down topics and also in finding sources, right? But kind of it has to start with some curiosity on your part, right? Go back to my example. Who's reading Wikipedia? What do they do with the information? How important is it to them? How valuable is it? Is it the only information they have? Right? You've got to start with some curiosity to generate research questions, and then read around the question, right? Read for the question, look at sources, and revisit your original questions. Go through that iterative process. Okay. So, to conclude, research as inquiry draws the frames together in a lot of ways. As I said, if the information creation as a process, the information as value. I mean, research as inquiry really, if you think of the process of research and the kind of the typical undergraduate essay assignment as researcher's inquiry, it does draw a lot of the frames together. So you can see a lot of opportunities, as I said, with scholarship as conversation and the other frames to draw this together. And this, by which I mean research, is why you are here. Okay, it is great. So as I said, you are a junior scholar in your field of study. And you are here because we want you to be growing as an independent, right, learner, autonomous learner, to have this ability to go out in the world and conduct research, read research, construct research questions, right? And so, yes, we're combining it with content knowledge in terms of you need to learn what is going on in the field, but the key difference between second level and third level education is, the second level, it's about, who were the kings of France, right? And in third level, it's not anymore the question about who were the kings of France, it's how is the assessment of the kings of France changed by historians, right? So, what we're looking for you to do is not master kind of, or not bank information about, facts and names and dates. We're looking for you to engage with interpretations, going back to that point about synthesis. That's really what we're after now. You're not going to be tested, or you shouldn't be tested, on, regurgitating the names of popes and the years of their reign or whatever. It's really, we want you to be actually functioning as junior scholars in terms of engaging in conversation with other scholars in that field. And your research as inquiry is part of that, as you kind of get familiarity with topics, getting familiarity with other people working in that field, and start to develop your own questions. So I hope this short lecture has provided a bit of an understanding for you about the frame research as inquiry, and I hope it's also giving you some things to think about in terms of how you will develop and approach your own writing and research questions going forward.